Good evening. Hello, Fáilte. Welcome. Kate Mila Fáilte. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Live Irish Myths. I'm Anthony Murphy of Mythical Ireland. Tonight, we're talking about Newgrange again. Hope you're all having a wonderful Saturday and a great weekend. Hope that you're safe and healthy no matter where in the world you are. You're very welcome along to Chuck Watercoo. Grab yourself a stool and a brew or a dram and something to eat, a potato sandwich if you prefer. And make yourselves comfortable. Welcome along to all the viewers on YouTube and on Facebook tonight, where we are going to be doing the 80th consecutive episode 8. And thank you all for accompanying us on this magnificent journey on YouTube tonight. Archaeoastronomy Database was the first along. Very much looking forward to this episode. Fáilte, good evening to you. Mandy McCurl says hello, everyone, from a sun-drenched Isle of Mull. Great picks for tonight's episode. Thank you, Anthony. Fáilte, Mandy, and you're very welcome. Daisy Peters is on board, ready to launch. Says, hi, Anthony and everyone. Fáilte, my Tua de MythFlix. Here we go for one more fantastic episode. Brilliant stuff. Sphinx Pichu, who may or may not be my son Finn, is also watching. Hello, Finn. How are you? The Full Irish says, another fine day on the sod. Fáilte, good evening. Indeed, Fáilte. Tusa Fane. Jackie Stevenson says, hello, Anthony and the two. This is going to be exceptionally good. Well, I hope it lives up to the billing. Pat Rowan is watching on Facebook. Patricia McAteer is watching. Todd Desper says, hello, Anthony and Tua. Giagwich Todd. Guido Bruce is watching. Hello, Guido. Fáilte. Arash. Jules Cousins says hello, Fáilte. Jules. Rowan Grove says hello from sunny Colorado. Giagwich Rowan. Patricia McAteer says hello there. Great photos earlier. Yeah, magnificent stuff being revealed out there at the moment at Newgrange. Barbara Kling says Trenonoa. Hello, Barbara. Fáilte. Barbara Barney says hi, Anthony. Giagwich. Lorna Evers Monaghan says hello. Looking forward to this one. This should be interesting, if not a little bit controversial, but we'll try and steer away from any nastiness. Lexi Erickson says, been looking forward to this episode. Lovely to have you along, Lexi. Karen Craig says, hello from Arkansas, USA. Giagwich, Karen. Gillian Smith is watching. Hello, Gillian. Nice to have you back in the house. Guido Bruce is watching. It's given me another notification. Guido, there are two of you. Either that or you're twice as good as we thought you were. Susan Bisaccia says, Fáilte, Anthony. Love these talks. Thank you, Susan, and you're welcome along. Make yourself comfortable. Michael Naylor says, hello to all, and that is Mike and Jeanette in New Jersey. Fáilte. Angel Barboni Smith says, hello, Anthony, and everyone else. Giagwich Angel. Kristen Murray Endre says, greetings all, and thanks, Anthony. You're very welcome. Lisa Blue says, Kerry Hawk Lesser. Oh, she's calling in a friend. That's okay. Ralph Waldron says, Trenonoa Otleag. Fáilte. Ralph. Margaret Ring is in the house. Round of applause. Matthew Bessel says, greetings from Gay Kelts. Hope you got our inquiry. Ta, as always. I'm a little bit tardy in catching up with the exceptional amount of correspondence that I have at the moment. I beg your forgiveness. Doris O'Hara says, Giagwich. Fáilte. Doris. Erin Durrett is watching. Josephine Meehan says, good evening, Anthony and Tua. Been preparing for exams in 2 weeks. Having a night off with you and the Tua. Bliss. Well, that sounds nice. I hope you enjoy your night off. And good luck with the exams, Josephine. Debbie Daly says, happy Saturday. And to a family. Fáilte, Debbie. Ken Williams says, evening all. Very nice to have you along, Ken. In case I need to check my facts, which I'm sure I'll need to do once or twice. Jerry Andrade says, good evening, Anthony and Tua. Another scorcher, wasn't it? It was indeed. A little bit breezy here on the East Coast. But other than that, fabulously warm. Fab, looking forward to this. Kathy May J.O. says, good evening, Mr. Anthony and all too. I had thunder and lightning to start my day this morning here in Newcastle, Washington State. Looking forward to today's MythFlix. Fáilte, Kathy. Alwyn Roy Badziak says, hello from Berkshire. This will be a very interesting episode. I certainly hope it will. Fáilte. Good evening to you, Alwyn. Trenonoa. Freya Stjoholm says, Banachty from Sweden. Love to everyone here. Banachty, Ort, Freya. Welcome. Joy Buckner Winkles says, hello from Minnesota. Hello, Joy. It's a joy to have you. Nora Gaffney O'Connor says, Giagriv Golair. 2 swim candles lit for you all. Fantastic. Thank you, Nora. Jennifer Ho says, aloha from Hawaii. Brilliant stuff. Aloha. Brilliant. Francis Tute is watching. Fáilte, Francis. Good evening to you. Hope you're well. Sylviane Cousin says, hello from Belgium. Wow. Fantastic. Welcome along. Ivania Lee says, Ivania Lee Morris here from Kiwi Land. Is that New Zealand, really? I mean, it must be, is it 4 a.m. in New Zealand? 5 a.m., 6 a.m.? It's sometime in the morning, isn't it? Imagine what you're in tomorrow, we're still in today. You're in Sunday, but you're very welcome along from the other side of the world. Dean T is watching this dragon to the moon. Yes, some of you will be undoubtedly watching the SpaceX. Sorry, the nose is at me again. We'll be watching the SpaceX on another screen. Lexi Erickson says, hi, Gillian. Trina New York says, hello, lovely Tua. Fáilte, Trina. Erin Durrett, love to you, Anthony, and the two. A great thunderstorm here in the Pacific Northwest this AM. Hope you got some pictures. Eva Anderson says, hello from Gothenburg. It's been lovely here today, and I will listen to this on the balcony to be able to enjoy the beautiful evening. Lovely stuff, Eva. Fáilte. Andy Zapata says, Andrea Zapata McKean from Argentina. Lovely to have you along, Andy. Andrea. Fáilte. Dave Russell says, hi everyone and blessings to her. You raised the bar last night with that Vimeo vid, Anthony, mate. Yeah, I must do a full-length version of the whole story. I must do that now. Gillian Smith says, good evening. Looking forward to this. Hope it provokes a little bit of discussion. Mariana Dunn says, greetings, dear Anthony, on our tour from sunny Virginia. Also watching pending SpaceX launch at 3:20 p.m. on my other computer. Brilliant stuff, Mariana. Hopefully all will go well. Paul Gowron says, here we go, here we go, here we go. Special interest for many of us tonight. Greetings on Tua. Mark Gordon says, good day. Hello, Mark. Fáilte. Yvette Tillema says, hi, Anthony. Thanks so much for all you do. My mind been expanding. Hello, Tua. Thanks for all the work you folks have been posting over on the Mythical Ireland community page. Yes, indeed. I second that. Guido, I have no idea what that was about. You know, it came up twice that you were watching. Debbie Redden Van Toyle says hello from Augusta, Georgia. Fáilte, Debbie, good evening. Margaret Ring says, good evening, Anthony. All the lovely to a happy 80th, Anthony. I don't look a day over 40. Never mind, 80th episode. I know. It's an attempt at humor and it's terrible. Ev Byrne is calling in a friend. Laura Puente says, greetings from Chicago again. I have my friend Rhonda joining me today. Hello, Laura and Rhonda. Fáilte. Jules Cousins says, my birthday, MythFlix. Is it your birthday today, Jules? Happy birthday to you. Michelin Linden says, a sunny day, New Orleans, missing Roots, Ireland. Don't miss us too much. Maybe you'll get a chance to come over soon enough. Marta Lopez Garcia says, hello, Anthony, and to a hot and sunny day here in Valencia, Spain. We would expect that it is, but you've shared a little bit of it with us in Ireland, so thank you for that. Alison Clipsham says, thank you for the image of Newgrange in context of the landscape. Not seen it like that before. Shows how important it was. Thank you, Alison, and welcome along. Megan Walters is in the house and says, hello all, Giaguch. Susan Bisaccia says, direct flights from Connecticut to Dublin. Looking forward to visiting Newgrange in the future. Wonderful. You pronounced my name correctly. Tom King says, good evening, Anthony, and all the fellow Tua. What a beautiful day. And it's story time. Just mighty. Yes, and the trees are in full leaf and growing rapidly. Melissa Barker says, greetings from Winter Park in Florida. Hello, Melissa. 18 minutes to launch. Oh, exciting. Some of the lads are watching it here. Kimberly Halligan is in sunny New York City. Looking forward to today's session. Fáilte, Kimberly. Sharon Callanan says, hello from Trim. Balya Trim in Condonamy. Sharon, Fáilte, good evening to you. Keith Carmody says, hello everyone, Fáilte. Adele Perth, who is in Adelaide in Australia, says, good morning. Hello everyone, Fáilte. Majinwa Adele, Fáilte along. Mary DeFalco says, hi Anthony, beautiful day in Cranford, New Jersey. Bunny from the Bronx. Hello Mary, Fáilte. Theresa McGuinness says, back again. Good to have you, Theresa. Judy McQueen says, hello, Giaguch. Giagiv. Tarini Pendleton says, Bannockty all from Laguna Beach in California. Hi Tarini. Sinead O'Reilly says, Jackie Myers Brown, you might enjoy this on Newgrange, Ireland. Nice to see people calling in their friends. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. Happy birthday, Jules is right. Eileen Donnelly Connolly says, hello from upstate New York. Hello, Eileen, good evening to you. Gina Locke says, hello from Spain, even though I'm not there. Hello, Gina, wherever you are. Bernie Courtney says, what a lovely way to wind up a Rewind. What a lovely day to wind up a spectacular day in County Mayo. 28 degrees apparently. Brilliant stuff, Bernie. Fáilte. Derek Kellett says, greetings from Duleek, which is Dowleague, the oldest stone church in Ireland, just a few miles out the road here from Drogheda. I'm looking forward to being up on the river in the morning and putting the discussions in context. Brilliant stuff. Rogue Vulcan says, rocket launch in 15 minutes. Brilliant. Camilla Relland is watching. Good evening, Camilla. Nice to have you along again. Donna Jean Porter says, hi there, Giagwich, Donna Jean. Danilo says, hi, Anthony from Italy. That's Danilo Paporello. My home in Ireland is Bray, County Wicklow. 7-3, the IZ1HVD, EI9HJB, indeed. Turnonawa to the Tua from Glasgow, Newgrange, says Podgy McConnell. Good evening, Podgy. Camilla says, good evening from Denmark. Hope you're all well. Looking forward to this episode of MythFlix. Good so far, Camilla. Donna K. Kelly says, Anthony, I can't begin to express what this series has meant to me. Always had an interest in Ireland's factual history, but only little knowledge of these myths and tales. I'm hooked. Thank you. Thank you indeed, Donna. Goramahagut. Longty Menosi says, howdy to Anthony and the wondrous Tua. Volche Longty. Adina Spark says, afternoon all. Hot here in New Mexico, but isn't it always hot there? Or does it get cold sometimes? Megan Walter says, it's a hot, sunny afternoon in Mississippi, feeling like summer. Brilliant stuff. That makes two of us. Oh, I don't mean we're both in Mississippi. Sinead O'Reilly says, greetings from London. Good evening to you, Sinead. Paula Snow Queen says, hello, Giagwich. John McGovern is watching. Falcha John. Dawn Hilton says, got to go to Manchester, but we'll catch up later. Big love. Dawn, we'll see you later on. Martin Doheny says, hello, Anthony and Tua from sunny South Kilkenny. A compliment from my wife, Anne, who was part listening 2 nights ago when reading her non-related book. Anthony's voice makes Irish history interesting. Yeah, thanks. Tell her, thanks very much. I also have a wife called Anne. She doesn't say the same stuff. She gets the personal stories, you know. She gets to hear the voice sometimes whispered in her ear. But that's enough of that. Martin, welcome along. Susan Scott says, hello, Anthony and all the MythFlixers. Sunny and warm in Connecticut. A glorious day. Wishing you all the same. Well, we're having a glorious evening here, but the sun will be going down in the next hour or so. Tom King is doing a countdown, but it's a bit early. And on YouTube, Jackie Stevenson is in the house. I may have said that already, did I? Can't remember. Ronald McFadden in Los Angeles says hello to both of you. John Main says, Banachdi San Francisco. Toshe 4 in you. It's cold in San Francisco. You need to come over to Ireland, John, but you're welcome. Viriant V says, hello and thank you from Woodland Hills, California. You're very welcome. Judith Nylan is watching. Long time no talk. Judith, how are you keeping? In Washington State, love being here with you and the tribe. The Curious Celt says, hi, Anthony and gang. Good evening from Antrim Falcha. The Woodsies in Monaster Boyce says, there's only one Anto Murphy walking along, singing along in a mythical wonderland. Evening, Anthony. Well, evening, Woodsies. You're very welcome along. Erica Rivertree says, Banachty O Louisville. Did we read that already? Oh, if we did, we did. And if we didn't, sure, we'll read it again. Hello, Erica. Nat's Ghost says, hi all. Thanks for the show. You're very welcome. Finn is reminding me that it's 20 minutes to launch, but that was a while back, so it's probably a lot less than that now. Good stuff. Okay, Mandy McCurl, yes, I did. Yes, indeed. Okay, we're up to date. So what is that in terms of time? It is 13. Let's call it 13:30. I also have to say thank you to Liam Smith, who a good while ago suggested this as an episode topic. So thank you, Liam. And thanks, as always, to the Mythical Ireland patrons who are on patreon.com/Mythical Ireland for your support of everything that we do here at Mythical Ireland. It is very gratefully received. And if you want to become a patron, head on over to patreon.com/Mythical Ireland and have a look at what you get in return for your support. Hopefully that will be something that will appeal to you. Anyway, we are talking tonight about Newgrange, and particularly the excavation and restoration of Newgrange. What I must tell you is this is not intended to be a comprehensive overview of same. This is more to address a couple of misconceptions and mistaken beliefs about Newgrange and its excavation and restoration, and also to give you some sort of personal feeling and opinion about same. So I want to make it clear from the beginning that this isn't an effort to denigrate any individuals. This is not an effort to cause controversy, but rather to address certain controversies about it and to put some things straight and to put people in the picture, because I believe a lot of what has been said online is founded on mistaken beliefs. So that's the direction I'm coming from tonight. Just the usual warning, because we've had a little bit of difficulty once or twice lately. If you see somebody trolling and making nasty comments, don't try to get my attention about it, because I won't be able to do anything about it during the broadcast. Rather, block them and report them to Facebook, and that usually gets rid of them fairly quickly. Thank you very much. Jim Conway is here. Fáilte, Jim. Good evening to you. Paula Snow Queen says, I have questions about this episode. Good stuff. You'll have more questions by the time it's ending, I'm sure. Sinead O'Reilly says, lovely sunny greeting from you, Anthony. Yes, indeed. And good evening, Sinead. Demi Woe says, watching the SpaceX launch, check in later. Hang on a second. No, you get your priorities in order. Watch this first. Never mind. There'll be loads of people updating us about it, I'm sure, anyway. Michelle Abrams says, hey, from down under. So glad I could make it today. Fáilte, Michelle. And I'm sure it's ridiculous o'clock there. It must be very early in the morning. It's great for you to join us. Okay, I think we're up to date. So this is going to be almost entirely. Marie Cronin says, it's great to be here. Fáilte, Marie. This is going to be almost entirely off the cuff. I don't intend to do much reading tonight. Oh, yeah. This was always going to be a different episode, because the difficulty with Newgrange, and this is the main issue, and this is the absolute core issue about Newgrange, the before and after the excavation. The core issue is that before and after, if you look at the photos, and you'll find them on mythicalireland.com, and you'll find them on the Mythical Ireland Facebook page, where you're watching, some of you, you'll find them with a Google search. It's 5:15 a.m., says Michelle. I told you it was early, but fair play to you for getting up and for being with us. It's lovely to have our friends from the other side of the world. Rowan, Vicky's in the house, and Evan. Fáilte, Vicky and Evan. And so there is a very, very great dichotomy. There is a very great contrast in the before excavation photos of Newgrange and the after excavation and restoration photographs of Newgrange. Notwithstanding the debate and the public discourse about that, is that there are facts and there are opinions. Now, I will address the facts and I will address the opinions. And your opinion is your own, and you're entitled to it. However, I would always ask you that your opinions be based somewhat on the facts. In the modern era, and particularly in the past 5 or 10 years, and with the development of the internet and, the lack of fact-checking that happens today, because people see pictures and are perhaps easily persuaded in terms of an argument by looking at those pictures. What is sometimes missing are the facts that inform those images. And so I'm going to give you some facts pertaining to Newgrange pre-excavation, and I'm going to give you some facts pertaining to Newgrange post-excavation. The opinion will still be yours at the end of the episode, and I respect that. I'm not trying to change your opinion. What I'm trying to do is inform your opinion, and to perhaps persuade you that all is not as it seems. Okay, so that's the purpose. Christine says, hello from Denmark. Hello, Christine. Fáilte. Pre-excavation. Here are some facts. You've already been appraised of some of these in previous episodes. Newgrange, until the excavations began in 1962, was a monument that was much forlorn, much collapsed, much dilapidated, much overgrown, much denuded. A lot of people look at the pictures pre-excavation. I shared one today taken in the 1930s by a lady who shared it with me and allowed it for publication. It's never been seen before. And people naturally look at that, and they look at the modern pictures of Newgrange, and you know what they say? Almost universally, they say, oh, geez, wasn't it lovely back then? oh, look at all the grass and the cows on it and the trees growing out of it. Wasn't it really natural looking, you know? That's a natural reaction. And when comparing the two, and especially where you see photographs that compare the two, people say, oh, jeez, look at the mess they made of it. It looks far too modern and far too neat and tidy. And it looks like a 1960s architect's, fantasy, you know. Now, Kathy Maydale, I'm going to try and address questions as they arise, but I don't want it to distract me too much. Kathy says, looks like they moved the entry stones. No, they did not move the entry stones, actually. So I will address the facts, as I said, and I will also address the inaccuracies. They did not move the entry stones. The roof box was restored, but we will address that. We will address that. In actual fact, in 1960, let's take 1960 as the base for this, because we spoke about that last night and about Glyn Daniels' opinions about the folklore in the 1960 calendar before the excavations could reveal what they knew. Megan says she never knew there was controversy. Yes, there's lots of controversy. Some of it is very public, and some of it, there's been a lot of backing and forthing online about it. I'm not, by the way, getting involved in personal slagging matches today. I'm not going to be naming people personally, by and large. Also, there's this sort of feeling about the place that it looks unnatural, right? And I grant that some people see it and they go, doesn't really look 5,000 years old, you know. It looks very modern, granted, and there's reasons for that. And I'll explain the reasons, and then you'll still have your opinion as to how it looks. In 1960, Newgrange was approximately 5,000 years old. I think the carbon dates for Newgrange kind of put it at around 3100 BC, which makes it 5,100 years. So let's just call it 5 millennia. It was 5,000 years old. For 4,000 of those years, archaeologists tell us, not until sorry, I'm confusing things a second. I need to also go back to 1699 AD, which is when the time that Charles Campbell, who was a Scottish Presbyterian, following the Battle of the Boyne, came into ownership. I don't think he owned them. I think he rented the lands of Newgrange, the townland of Newgrange from. I think one of the Moors, the Countess of Drogheda, I think, was the one who owned the lands. Anyway, 1699 was the time when the passage and chamber were rediscovered. And that's because Charles Campbell, who was building his house out there, said to his servants, go up there and rob loads of stones off that cairn and we'll use them for building my house. And that's when the entrance was discovered. Sometime about 5 centuries after Newgrange was built, so around about the threshold, actually, of the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, around about 2500 BC, archaeologists tell us that there was a substantial collapse of the cairn, a slippage of the cairn material. The mound of Newgrange, we call it a mound, is actually a cairn. It is mostly made of loose, water-rolled stones that were fetched from the bed of the Boyne. Thousands of them, tens of thousands of them, about 250,000 tons worth of them. And at some point, all of the cairn material slipped out over the edge. It covered over the curbstones and it covered over the entrance. It seems actually that it covered the whole thing, and that was the way it remained until 1699. Part of the reason we know that is because there were Roman coins which were found deposited on top of the cairn slip material in the vicinity of the entrance. But with most archaeology, we need to make informed guesses, but leave most of the guessing to experts and not the self-proclaimed ones. Well, Christine, it's very interesting how much the opinions and informed guesses vary, even among the experts, actually, funnily enough. But yes, you're right. You're right, of course, fundamentally. Now, there's an argument as to whether that was the case, that Newgrange was effectively sealed up, the curbstones invisible, and the passage and the entrance sealed up from about the beginning of the Bronze Age until 1699 AD. There's an argument about that. in the annals of Ulster and the annals of the Four Masters, it is mentioned that the cave of Acho Aldi and Cnogba and Doad and the cave of the Gubon's wife at Drogheda, which I take to be Millmount and Drogheda, were raided by the foreigners, the Vikings, the Danes, and that is the only time that Acho Aldi is ever given, that Newgrange is ever given that name, Acho Aldi. And in fact, some experts disagree that it might not necessarily refer to Newgrange. So was Newgrange plundered in the 9th century in the year 861, according to the Annals of the Four Masters, or 863, according to the Annals of Ulster? We do know that the cave or the passageway was opened up in 1699. Edward Cloyd was the first of the antiquarians who visited and documented and drew it and detailed it. And I think it was him that actually put a stop to Campbell's vandalism, and thankfully so, because Newgrange would not have survived in the mostly intact as it did until the 20th century. Inside, because of the weight of the cairn, inside the passage, what had happened was the weight of the cairn was pushing down on the capping stones, the passage capping stones, the roofing stones, and pushed the orthostats, or these passage stones, the verticals, had leaned down so that the capping stones were pushing down and the orthostats leaned in. And the effect that this had was that the light that would have come in originally through the roof box, that is that slit or aperture above the doorway, could no longer reach the chamber because it was meeting the bottom of the roof slabs. Mello Nello says, good evening, Anthony, and fabulous tua. Hello, Neil Folge. Bonsoir. Also, there is an issue with, or there was an issue, and one of the reasons that the excavation and restoration of Newgrange was originally discussed at all with the Board of Works, etc., was because there was a safety issue. There was an increase in the number of visitors to Newgrange, and there was a safety issue. Stones were falling out of place. There was a danger of collapse. There was a danger that somebody was going to go in there and get themselves hurt or killed, worse still. And so to address this, the Board of Works and Professor O'Kelly and others discussed the idea of excavation and repairs and part restoration. Now, there is a romantic aspect to, what was the name? Acho Aldi, Achadhi Aldai. I'll just type that in as a comment, just so you can see it. Acho Aldi. Now, I will admit immediately that there is something romantic about those images. Actually, there is something romantic today about Douth, which is in a sort of a similar condition. Part of the curb is covered. It's all covered with grass and gorse. There's a huge sycamore tree growing out of the south side of it. And it's lovely to be there. And it's lovely to kind of be at one of the monuments that kind of hasn't had that makeover, that modern makeover that Douth and Newgrange have both had. So there's something romantic about the images in which you see wild hawthorn bushes growing out of Newgrange, you see the big trees growing out of it, and you see the cattle on top of it grazing it. Yes, there's something nice about that. However, the mistake that people make, and the trap that they fall into in comparing the modern pictures with the old, is that they think that the pre-1960s picture, such as the 1930s picture I shared earlier today, they mistake that with the original. They think that, they immediately think that, oh, that's the way it should look, and we don't like the white quartz and the way it's all very neat and tidy now. And you may not, at the end of this episode, you still may not like the way it looks now. And as I said, I am not trying to persuade you in that regard. I just want to make sure that when you make that judgment is based somewhat on the facts of the situation. And the facts of the situation are that Newgrange pre-1962 was in a much forlorn and dilapidated state, was only a shadow of its original self. Now, some of the facts pertaining to the post-1962 to roughly mid-1970s excavation and restoration. Professor Michael O'Kelly was the leading archaeologist of the period. That is a fact. Whether you get into, it looks like the liftoff is going ahead, and Godspeed to them and the best wishes to them. As you know, I'm very interested in astronomy and space, and I'm very interested in space travel, so I wish them well. Professor O'Kelly was the leading archaeological expert of his time. His wife, Claire O'Kelly, was a significant part of the team that excavated and detailed and restored. There have been some, and again, I'm not going to get into personal slagging matches here, and don't try to drag me in that direction because I will ignore you for good reason. Professor O'Kelly has been much maligned. He died in the early 1980s, around the time the book Newgrange, Archaeology, Art and Legend was published. That has been considered the definitive account of the excavations. It isn't. It is a book designed to capture as much of the flavour of the excavations and restoration as possible. If Professor O'Kelly had lived on, he would have produced more voluminous works, as Professor George Ogan has done around Nowth. We spoke about that in previous episodes. I showed you some of those volumes, and those volumes are still being produced. The excavations at Nowth also began in 1962, but lasted longer. At no point did Professor O'Kelly attempt to vandalise Newgrange. At no point did he ever consider that what he was doing was a form of vandalism. It is true that archaeology and excavation is intrusive. It is an intrusive process, and it is a destructive process. You only really get one chance when you excavate a monument or a part of a monument, because you dig down through stratigraphy and layers of deposits and material, etc. You disturb them in digging them. You can never put it back the way you found it. Of course you can't. So you have to record everything meticulously with drawings, and in the modern era with photography, and of course in the up-to-date modern era, a lot of archaeology is done with remote sensing, and there's less digging than there was before. Professor O'Kelly also had an engineering background, which is very important in terms of the dealing with the excavations and the restoration of Newgrange. He put it back together the way he thought that it should be put back together, based on how he thought it had appeared originally, entirely informed by what he found during his excavations and that meticulous recording. Now, I haven't personally seen the archive. Ken Williams, who's with us on the chat here, has seen it. And Ken has told me in many conversations that it is extremely comprehensive. And a lot of the people who are making claims about Newgrange and its restoration have not seen that archive. So I want to hold my hands up and tell you I have not seen it. I'm a third party to it, as it were. However, regardless of that, is the fact that O'Kelly took material off the outer passage, removed the capping stones, righted the orthostats, put the capping stones back on. But there was concrete. Now, the concrete adds an element of controversy for a lot of people. I understand why that is so. Of course I do. People think that concrete has no place in an ancient monument. Okay, Theresa McGuinness says structural engineering here. Hopefully, Theresa, you will understand a little bit, perhaps more than most of us, about what's involved here. Nowth, in particular, has a lot of concrete in it now. People say there's no place for concrete in a modern monument. How then does one address the issue of how we make the monument safe for people to visit? And also, how do we extract as much information out of it as possible in terms of the excavation of it? Deirdre Nichochain says, hello from Western Canada. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, Deirdre. Hello and good evening to you. How do we address all of these things? How do we do the excavation? How do we consider the engineering aspects of it? How do we consider the reconstruction of it, the restoration of it, the the conservation is how archaeologists call this, you know. And Megan, you have asked a very interesting question, and that is an important part of the discussion. My biggest question, says Megan, is how the original held up without the special structures added in reconstruction. I understand why he did that, but how did it look without these supports? It's more a deep curiosity. Now, we know that that was the case partly based on O'Kelly's own experiments, in which he recreated the facade and showed how it collapsed and show how the white quartz came onto the ground in a wedge profile with everything else on top of it. But also there are monuments in France which have that very steep-sided front on them. Ken, I can't immediately recall the name of the monument in Brittany. The one, isn't it Mont something? I know Ken Williams will give us the name of it momentarily. This is part of the whole argument about how the thing collapsed. Was it an intentional collapse? Was it an accidental thing? Was it as a result of that poor understanding of engineering? Was it that, you know, there just wasn't enough supporting material there behind the quartz that made it collapse? Was it designed to collapse and seal itself off for centuries and millennia? That is an argument that could be made, and that's a discussion that could be had. So the thing about the concrete, we have to address that. And here is one of the biggest misconceptions about the whole thing. What happens is there's a very facile and very shallow discussion that happens inside a person's own mind, persuaded sometimes. Petit-Mont, Bananaise, and Cairn Eel have all near vertical dry-walled facings. Thank you, Ken. Thank you very much for your help. The facile argument is this. Look, doesn't Newgrange look lovely before the excavation? Oh, look at with the trees and the cows and the bushes and the grass. Doesn't it look lovely and natural? And that is an immediate mistake. It is dilapidated, damaged, denuded, collapsed, totally unnatural. And they look at the modern pictures and they say, oh, doesn't that look terrible? You know, oh, I don't agree with that at all. And as I said, at the end of the episode, you may still disagree, and that's perfectly okay. That's fine. Just make sure that you're informed. And people make the mistake of saying, O'Kelly must have been some cowboy to allow that to happen. In fact, O'Kelly argued against the concrete. Okay? He argued against it. O'Kelly argued for a loose stone reconstruction of the revetment. Now, and that's a thing that gets lost in all of the online controversy, whether it be those whimsical or those shallow, facile discussions that happen on Facebook groups, or whether that is the discussions that happen at a deeper level in archaeological circles. The archaeologists actually are quite divided on the whole subject of the reconstruction. And again, that's okay. The monument as you see it today, despite how it may appear in terms of its modern look and its manicured look, they keep the grass cut on the top of it. The OPW staff do that every couple of weeks during the summer. It gets a haircut. The monument is safe to visit. You can go there without any danger of stones falling on you. You can go inside without any danger of the structure collapsing on you. And that was never going to be the case if it was left as it is. So those things had to be addressed. In the excavation of Newgrange, we learned a huge amount about it. We learned the age of it. Elizabeth Tuhig is here. Fáilte, Elizabeth, it's very nice to have you here. Elizabeth is an archaeologist of many, many years standing, and somebody who I personally respect as an archaeologist, and who I know probably respects the work of the O'Kellys very deeply. So this facile discussion, we must do away with this base and facile and you know, factless discussion. You can compare the before and after, but when you do so, please do so from an informed base. Make sure that you know that the monument as it appeared with the trees growing out of it, I think they were planted. Were they planted by Campbell or were they planted by owners? And were they planted by the Gradwells? Those trees don't give it a Neolithic appearance. There were no big oak and sycamore trees growing out of Newgrange in the Neolithic. Of course there weren't. In fact, one of those tree roots got right down into the chamber where it grew in the roofing stone of the right-hand recess. That's the roofing stone, the chamber capstone. That is the most decorated capstone in Newgrange, and caused it to crack and broke it in two. So no, it is not natural to have trees and huge bushes growing out of Newgrange. That's not to say that the people who built it originally may not have allowed trees and bushes to grow, but the idea that that somehow gives it a natural look is a mistaken belief. The idea that a 4-meter high concrete wall supporting the courts gives it any sort of a natural look is, of course, mistaken also. It doesn't, and nobody's trying to say that it does. One of the curbstones was split by a tree as well, says Ken. Now, I do want to read something to you, and I want you to bear in mind all of what I've said. And I understand that this is a little bit controversial. The whole thing is controversial. My aim, as I said at the outset, is not to stir controversy. It is just to inform as far as possible that controversy. What do I personally think? Personally, I think Newgrange looks modern. Yes, I do. Personally, I think it has a very tidy, manicured, neatly edged look. Do I think that's exactly what it looked like in the Neolithic? No, I don't. Do I think it's a good representation of what it looked like? Yes, I do. Which do I think is the better representation of Newgrange? The pre-1962 photographs or the post-1970s photographs? The post-1970s photographs. I think that much should be obvious. It is impossible for any one of us to entirely defend the work that was led and spearheaded by one person who was very knowledgeable and probably had opinions and was probably very headstrong in that respect. But it behoves us, I think, in any discussion of it, to allow Professor O'Kelly's, to allow his reputation not to be posthumously muddied by lack of facts. And unfortunately, his reputation has suffered a great deal as a result of the activities of one or two individuals. So I'm going to read this, and I know this is going to be controversial, but at the same time, it gives you some of the context. And this is from Geraldine and Matthew Stout's book about Newgrange. Years ago, we had the privilege of hearing M.J. O'Kelly discuss his work at Newgrange before a large and enthusiastic meeting of the University College Dublin Archaeological Society. We hung on his every word until the end, when he showed Newgrange before the excavation and then after its reconstruction. O'Kelly believed that his work breathed, quote, some faint spark of life into Newgrange, unquote. In other words, he wasn't claiming that it was a definitive work, justifying its claims to be the mansion of the good God, the Dagda of early Irish tradition. He asked, which would you prefer? Too polite to speak, we said nothing, but it must have dawned on everyone there, so soon after the wall was constructed, that it constituted a monumental mistake. Now, bear in mind that these are archaeologists talking about another archaeologist, and this is to give you context, that is all. This is not to say that Professor O'Kelly was wrong about the monument's original appearance. No one knew Newgrange better than O'Kelly. He took the tomb apart and put it back together again. He literally and figuratively wrestled with the true nature of the passage tomb for a prolonged period between excavation and restoration. He had many powerful arguments for the existence of a retaining wall, the quantity of quartz, the thickness of the turves, reconstructions of the wall's collapse, engineers' reports, actual evidence for the wall discovered at the north of the tomb. Great men, great archaeologists, are rarely troubled by uncertainties. For O'Kelly, sufficient evidence existed for the revetment wall on the curb, and he recommended a dry stone wall. Dry stone wall, you heard those words, be built, as he believed it would have been constructed in the Neolithic. No concrete. The archaeologist who gets most maligned about the appearance of Newgrange and the concrete is the one who didn't want the concrete. The architect charged with implementing O'Kelly's vision deemed the construction of so flimsy a structure impractical and unsustainable. After all, the first quartz wall was thought to have collapsed in one sudden event, not a good omen for the safety of future tourists. The cairn is highly unstable, and the outward force of the cairn is immense. The erection of a massive reinforced concrete wall rising to a height of 4 metres from behind the curbstones along the southeastern front of Newgrange was the practical solution to implementing O'Kelly's interpretation. The quartz was embedded into the concrete and steel structure, and the rounded granite boulders were placed at random, like currants in a quartz scone. The suggestion has been made that the dark granite boulders could have been placed within the wall, forming geometrical patterns in the style of the artwork on the curbstones. Happily, this notion was not expressed in the final reconstruction. The erection of the white quartz wall represented the rejection of the 1961 committee's view that a, quote, shapely hemispherical mound of stones, unquote, should be reconstructed. In its uniformity, this great wall also fails to mirror excavation results that prove that whatever the angle of original construction, there was a tapering off on either side of the entrance stone. O'Kelly could not have calculated how long a dry stone wall built of quartz fragments and rounded granite boulders would have withstood the pressure of the cairn material behind it. One of the marvels of the construction of the passage tomb within the cairn is that it basically remained intact and almost completely waterproof to this day. It was, in other words, built not for a generation, but for all time. Are we to believe that Neolithic engineers, who so ingeniously built the enduring tomb, also constructed so ephemeral a facade? Erica Bow is in the room. Good afternoon, Erica. The quartz wall inflicted a 1960s standard of office block design upon a structure that had stood for 5,000 years and had been a ruin for 4,000 of them. And I'm really glad that the Stouts say that it had been a ruin for 4,000 years. It was the last time in Ireland that scientific opinion, no matter how well-founded, and a modern aesthetic would be allowed to impinge so forcefully on the ancient. If it were done again, the current approach to the presentation of ancient monuments would have seen Newgrange restored as unobtrusively as possible. Accessible, yes, but a ruin. The views of the excavator would be captured in models of the passage tomb to be viewed in the visitors' centre. This was in fact proposed as late as 1971, when there was growing unease with the restoration programme. O'Kelly insisted that his wall be built, although, as I said already, he wanted a dry stone wall. As an approach to interpretive reconstruction, New Newgrange is itself a monument to past standards. And what more needs to be said in that regard? So you can see the argument, and you can see the difficulty, and you can see the discussion. But as I said, so much of the argument online that is made pertaining to the reconstruction of Newgrange is not informed by the facts. And the facts are manifold, and the opinions even more so. And even among archaeologists, the opinions vary. O'Kelly essentially had that singular, that one-off opportunity to excavate what was the dream monument, the dream excavation, the once, not in a lifetime, the once in a 1,000 years, the once in a 5,000-year opportunity. He was magnanimous because he left large portions of the monument unexcavated, because he understood that archaeology was an evolving and advancing science, and that in the future, methods and means would be available, and technologies, to archaeologists. And therefore, it was important to him not to destroy all of the stratigraphy in his digging. And I mean destroy, that's a very poor choice of word. I'm sorry, I didn't mean destroy as in willfully, as in vandalize. I meant as in when you excavate, you naturally destroy the stratigraphy as you go down through it. In the final analysis, one looks at the end product and one is conflicted about it. I'm speaking personally here. I am conflicted about it. I understand a lot of the arguments for and against. I see both sides of it. If, for instance, let's speculate for a moment, hypothesize, if Doubt was to be excavated and restored today, how would that be done? It would be done with a very, very limited excavation, a couple of trenches perhaps, the revelation of part of its curb perhaps. But as the Stouts say there in the book, a lot of it would be left as a ruin and it would be made accessible. I don't think Doubt will be excavated in my lifetime, and I'm very glad to say that, actually. And exactly as O'Kelly foresaw, archaeology has developed and continues to develop. So Millmount is a classic example of how archaeology is trying to answer some of the questions without that digging, that destruction of stratigraphy, etc., etc. And Millmount in Drogheda, just to put you in the picture, is a Norman moat, which is believed to be a prehistoric burial mound that was reworked and refashioned a number of times by the Anglo-Normans during the reign of Elizabeth I. There were 5 small towers put into the mound at the perimeter of it. There was a windmill built on it in the 14th century, I think. And in the early 19th century, in 1808, a very large defensive structure, a Martello Tower, was built on top of it by the British, who wanted to, Drogheda was a garrison town and they wanted to reinforce it. So it has been much reworked. But there's still a belief in the locality, and a belief that I'm party to, because I believe Millmount to be part of that ancient complex of monuments, that there might be something underneath it that might be stones or a chamber or something like that. And archaeologists have been using techniques over the past decade to look into Millmount without actually doing any digging. Now, the same techniques hopefully will be employed at Newgrange, and I know that that program began a number of years back, but it just didn't proceed, and it would be lovely to find out and to have an answer to that question that's been nagging us for years about whether there's a possibility of another undiscovered passage and chamber under Newgrange. But even in the 1960s, there had been a trench dug around the curbs. I think that was McAllister, if I'm not mistaken, Ken. RAS McAllister had dug, I think he was run off the land, wasn't he, by the landowner during his attempts to do that. That they wanted to reveal the curbs, the curbstones. Some of the curbs are as of yet unrevealed on the western side. Ken says the Stouts don't take into account in the passage you read that the existing 19th century wall was falling down and had to be removed or repaired. Leaving Newgrange as it was never an option. Even before O'Kelly was selected to excavate, animals were walking all over it and causing the stone to erode, as well as the trees and bushes, etc. Yeah, exactly. And thank you again, Ken, for your. There are some of the archaeologists who are very, very, very well read in terms of the excavation and restoration of Newgrange, and Ken Williams I consider to be a foremost authority in this regard. The ultimate argument, I think, is a subjective one, isn't it? We can deal with the facts. Kerem Gogus is here, Fáilte Kerem. We can deal with the facts and we can deal with the opinions. Now, let's deal with the facts first. And we've given a sort of a brief summary of them. And of course, it is much more comprehensive. And at the very least, I think if you're going to make any sort of attempt to argue publicly about Newgrange, the very first thing that you should do is you should read O'Kelly's account, Newgrange, Archaeology, Art and Legend, followed immediately by his Claire O'Kelly's account of Newgrange, the illustrated guide to Newgrange. You should also probably appraise yourself with Robert Hensey's book, First Light, The Origins of Newgrange, and basically read as much material about Newgrange as possible before you enter this domain of making arguments based on appearances, which is what a lot of people do. Now, the roof box has been an area of controversy. I'm not going to get involved again in personal slagging matches, but in recent years, the media ran with a story from a particular individual that claimed that the roof box was a 50-year-old construction and that it had basically been constructed during the excavations of Newgrange. All I'm going to say about that, apart from the need for people to read this work and also to read the blog posts that Ken Williams has constructed. Ken, you might share the links to those with us so that people who want to pursue this can do so afterwards. Without getting into too much of the detail on that, I will give you a fact that the overwhelming majority of other archaeologists, in other words, not the people making the claims and not the O'Kellys who are not here to defend themselves because they're deceased, the overwhelming body of Irish archaeologists who deal with prehistory and who deal with the Neolithic and who deal with Newgrange and Brú-na-Bóinne, that type of monument, disagree. And I think largely there is a consensus that the roof box was not perhaps original, as in, I know Robert Hensey outlines an argument that the passage was extended. George Ogan also contends that the passages of Knowth were extended. And there's even a discussion around the possibility that the passages at Douth, certainly the southern chamber, that there's an annex onto the southern chamber that was perhaps part of a smaller original monument. So that doesn't impinge upon our argument. The argument here is that the roof box is not a 50-year-old construction. It is not a false lintel. It is actually a crucial part of the architecture of Newgrange. Now, what makes that whole discussion interesting is some of the discussions we've been having this week about Newgrange and the folklore and the mythology of Newgrange that appears to describe it and its functions, that we would have to go back a long time to see. The idea of light streaming in there from the sun shining onto artwork in the chamber, the idea of the morning star shining in there, the idea of Sirius shining, I'm not so sure that that was a tradition of it. The traditions in the mythology that describe it as a white-topped monument, brilliant to approach. And I know that there's arguments to be made in relation to that, but the traditions of it are very powerful. Ken is just sharing with us BoyneValleyTombs.com, where he puts up a history. And I urge you earnestly, if you have any opinion about Newgrange, you must read this stuff. And if you still have an opinion about it at the end of it all, that's okay, as I say. If your opinion is still Newgrange looks modern and I don't like it the way it looks, I am not going to take that away from you, and I'm not trying to denigrate that opinion in any way. As I said at the beginning, the aim here tonight was just to make sure that at the very least you acquaint yourself with some of the facts pertaining to pre-excavation and post-excavation restoration. Conservation is what the archaeologists call that. There is perhaps an entirely other day's work involved in the discussion around the materials used in reconstructions and whether concrete and reinforced rebar, as it's called, have a place in that. How else do you do it? How else was O'Kelly's vision to be realized? We're dealing with a different era. We're dealing with a half a century ago. If it was done today, it would be done differently. Undoubtedly, if you put 5 archaeologists in 5 separate rooms and acquainted them with the facts of the situation as they pertained in the early 1960s, everyone would probably have similarities in their approach to excavation and restoration, and of course everyone would differ. The greatest thing that anybody has in this is hindsight, and hindsight has informed, poorly in my opinion, a lot of the opinions about Newgrange. Whether you think aesthetically it looks nice or not, I think is actually a secondary argument. The principal argument here is that O'Kelly somehow wrecked or vandalized Newgrange, or fantasized, created a fantasy. And I think that we malign him at our peril. And I think that it's a great tragedy that individuals would attempt to do that. Not that for a second anybody is attempting to hold him on a pedestal And that is the counter argument that's made, that nobody is allowed to have an opinion about the restoration. Of course, you're allowed to have an opinion, but always, always it must be an opinion based on the facts and appraised by the facts of the situation. And it is deeper and much more complex than the facile and sometimes very juvenile arguments that, oh, look, look at the 1930 photograph and look at the 1980 photograph. And, it's clear that, in the hearts of people, the pre-excavation pictures win out because they're romantic and they seem to appeal to a romantic fabric. They seem to appeal to an otherworldly and old worldly fabric or element in people. And people want to go back to that time. And the truth is that time never existed, because Newgrange was at that time, as I said, largely a ruin and largely a shadow of its former self. Today, I think that we are tremendously fortunate that we can stand, not obviously right now during the COVID pandemic, but up until early March we could, and hopefully in the near future we will again. We are able to stand at this monument. We're able to touch this monument. We are able to enter this monument. We are able to experience, some of us who win the lottery, the winter solstice illumination. Those of us who haven't had that pleasure witness a reconstruction or a fabrication, not a fabrication, a replicate, what's it called? Oh, I can't think of the word right now. A simulation of it, where they allow the artificial light to stream in. And a great deal of the reason we're able to do that is because of the work of Professor Michael O'Kelly and his team. Notwithstanding all of the arguments that could be made about how it could be done if it was over again, and hindsight and all that, and how different it might look if a modern archaeologist or team of archaeologists did, OPW did the restoration, says Elizabeth. See also my paper, Robert Hensey, in JIA, the Journal of International Archaeology, 2017. Yes, exactly. And that is the point, that, that in addition to the actual archaeology and the digging and the recording, there's the whole side of it in terms of the reconstruction that is not, I think, properly addressed in the discussions about how it looks now. That wasn't necessarily one person or one small group of individuals' vision. That was informed by a much wider discussion and set of arguments. And anecdotally, one would hear that was probably quite rancorous at times. I don't think it's appropriate really to close out with the question, which do you prefer? Ultimately, I don't think it is possible for any of us to know exactly how Newgrange looked immediately after it was built. Aaron asks, didn't you read recently something from an old source that referred to the brew as having been covered with white stone? Is there a reason why they didn't cover it with the quartz? I think that's because there wasn't enough quartz to cover it, Aaron. Now, I'm not quite sure how much of that might have been carried off over time. Yes, the white. I think I've addressed that in Newgrange Monument to Immortality. I've given the sources for that, but a lot of the cairns at Loughcrew were covered with white quartz. And apparently a lot of that was carried away in the 19th and 20th centuries by local people and broken down to be used as quartz gravel or white gravel for grave coverings. And that, even that in itself, is very interesting. The fact that white stones have long been used, to decorate places of burial. How much of that might have been brought originally strictly from one location is another discussion. Where it actually came from is a discussion, because it's long been said it comes from Wicklow, but there's a geologist George Sevastopoulos, I hope I have his name right, who believes that Rockabill Islands may have been a source for quartz for Newgrange. Yeah, some of the descriptions would appear to indicate that it was originally covered. How much of that might have been carted off? You see, a certain amount of it might have fallen over in the collapse and been covered over. A certain amount of it might have been taken away over time. And this is one of the reasons that we probably can never know exactly how it looked. I think we can close out by saying this much. When it was completed in the Neolithic, Newgrange did not look how it looked in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. It did not. It did not look anything like that. However, with full honesty, hand on heart, it's not possible for me to sit here and say that it looked the way it did post-restoration in the Neolithic. However, I think that the way it looks now probably, in fairness, more closely resembles how it looked when it was finished than that shoddy mess that it was in the pre-excavation photos. Romantic as they are, and appealing to some sense of, nostalgia in us and old worldliness and otherworldliness, they do not reflect the picture. And that is the single biggest thing that I see in any of the discussion that happens mostly on Facebook, it has to be said. When you see an old image of Newgrange shared, inevitably you get the comments underneath. Oh, they ruined it. Look, it looks terrible now. And look, it looked so lovely back then. It didn't look lovely. The reality is it was an overgrown, denuded shadow of its former self. But anyway, you know my feelings about things. I like to, as far as is humanly possible, I like to give both sides of the story, or every side of the story. And I would not staunchly defend the reconstruction and restoration of Newgrange. I would fairly staunchly defend Professor O'Kelly as an archaeologist. I think that he did very little wrong, in fact, and I think he has been much maligned, and very wrongly maligned. And we forget too, and this is very important, that members of his family still live. And how would you feel if somebody had organized a campaign of vilification against the good name of your deceased parents? How would you like it? Put yourself in their position. I think it's disgraceful, actually, at times. Notwithstanding that one person's vision of things is not perfect, and we're all human at the end of the day, and nobody is acquainted with the full facts of a situation. Anyway, I think I have said enough. I thank you all for watching, and I actually really appreciate the feedback. I'm glad that perhaps some of you at least feel that you have at least been acquainted with a few more of the facts in this situation. And I knew it was going to be a difficult one for me to get into without having to try and address some of those controversies. And remember that every person who speaks about this is ultimately not acquainted with the full facts. Even those who are genuinely experts and who are genuinely very, very, very well acquainted. We can never know is the answer. We can never know the full picture. We can know a good deal of it though. Do yourself a favor. After we finish, Google Newgrange Excavations 1962 RTE archive and go and have a look at the RTE archive footage and the interview with Professor O'Kelly as the excavations were taking place there, and get yourself just for a moment a sense of the man and the human being that he was, and certainly don't do what a lot of people seem to do. Don't be hasty and don't make a rush to judgment about an individual or an individual's work based on a couple of pictures that you've seen online. There's far too much of that happens these days, far too much of it, far too simplistic and juvenile and shallow arguments being made around a couple of pictures. Let us not make ourselves party to conspiracy theories, folks. Let us at the very least honour the work of the people who have strived very diligently and very openly, actually, to preserve and restore part of our heritage so that future generations could enjoy it. And a great deal of the reason that we are able to do that today in the case of Newgrange is as a result of the work of Michael O'Kelly and Claire O'Kelly and their team, as imperfect as that might seem to people. So there you go. Ken, I think, has shared links to his site. Ken, I bow to Ken's knowledge and to Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your presence tonight. I bow to your greater knowledge in this regard and to any resources that you've been able to share with us in that regard. And I close out by saying that Newgrange will stand for many, many more, hopefully decades, centuries, and millennia. And perhaps in the future, somebody will come and visit it and say, hey, look, you know, at some point in its past, it had a significant remodeling. And you know what? That is a feature of the great monuments of the Boyne, as Professor Ogan knew when he excavated Nowth, because he found it had undergone significant remodelings in the past, as undoubtedly Millmount has. Undoubtedly, we'll find that Dowth has. And Newgrange, the story is not complete there as of yet. Good night to all of you. I hope you'll join us tomorrow. I haven't a clue what we're going to talk about tomorrow. I know that I promised you that we would deal with Altram Chia Gávatar as one of the stories of Newgrange. That's going to take probably 2 or 3 episodes. I think I might break just for tomorrow because we've been talking about Newgrange all week. And I think we'll break and we'll talk about something completely different tomorrow. And then we'll get back to Newgrange next week. In the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. It's still a fabulous evening here. The sun is just about to go down. It's lovely and bright. It's been a lovely warm day. Thank you all for watching, and I know that you're all very good in support of each other, and in fairness, there has been no major rows and no trolling, as you see happens in so many of these discussions on other Facebook pages. It descends into nastiness. And Professor O'Kelly, he's not here to defend himself. He's not here to stand up for himself and to make those counter arguments. And I think it behoves some of us who have read his work to do so on his behalf, at least to defend some of his honour when it is disparaged by reckless individuals. Anyway, good night. Don't forget to keep washing your hands. Maintain your physical and social distancing. If you're outside, especially if you're going into supermarkets or stores or whatever, where there are going to be people in your vicinity who may not be exactly adhering with that, wear a face mask. Make sure it covers your nose and your mouth. It's not obligatory in a lot of places, but it is recommended. Let's keep the numbers low. Let's make sure everybody keeps safe and well, that you can keep coming back here and enjoying Live Irish Myths. I've really enjoyed your company tonight. Look forward to seeing you again tomorrow night. In the meantime, Colosov, sound sleep, Slán go fóill, and Banachti, Mo Vanacht Orav Ihawa. Bye-bye.